Revenge of the Black Cloak Society. A King's Quest based fic. Prologue. A shadow enters Daventry. Brutus stayed just outside the border of the land of Daventry. It was known that the realm of Daventry ended at the edge of the forest he operated from. The ruler of Daventry, King Graham, frowned on thievery in his kingdom. Of course, that's why Brutus did his work where he did. He was a bandit. Of course, most of his fellow bandits would rob everyone who came across the road. But he tended to focus more on the people that appeared well off. They didn't cross his area that often, but when they did, he was able to take just enough to get by for a while. Of course, there were others who used the path he did his work on. Those usually were other malcontents who dared to commit crimes in Daventry. He knew better than to try and rob them. To try and rob one of them would lead to death, and he was not too eager to die. He also knew that if one of them were using this road, it meant that they were about to be captured for crimes. As he watched the road, he knew he wouldn't have to worry about one group passing his path. He knew the Black Cloak Society would never use the path. They were usually dark wizards that would use their own dark powers to appear anywhere. Daventry used to have a home of one of their group, the witch Dahlia, until King Graham had destroyed her. It wasn't until recently, when the kingdom of Daventry was invaded by another of their ranks, the wizard Mordak. The wizard had successfully abducted the entire castle, until King Graham had defeated him. Brutus had heard stories about how each member of the royal family had encountered one member or another of the Black Cloak Society. There was even a rumor that the time loss that happened a while back was caused by another member of the Black Cloak Society, until he was stopped by a young man named Connor. He was almost lost remembering that when he noticed a man walking down the path toward Daventry. Brutus smiled with the thought that another wealthy individual was coming his way. The man even carried himself with the authority that wealth makes a person think they have. As the person neared, he pulled out his knife and jumped into the path of the person, and saw them stop. He smiled and said, "All right, hands in the air and hand over your valuables." He watched as the figure looked him in the eyes. As they looked at one another, Brutus could see that the man had no fear in his eyes. That was unusual for anyone he attacked. He then heard a hiss and glanced down to see a cat had peeked out of the dark robe that his victim was wearing. He then glanced back at the victim's eyes and started to wonder why he was robbing this individual. As he looked at the individual, he wondered why he had stopped this dark-haired man when he should be searching Daventry for the home of Dahlia. He even wondered why he was holding a knife on them. He quickly put the knife away and just said, "Sorry about that. I forgot I was looking for something. I have to find it for..." He wasn't sure who he was finding it for, but he knew he was hunting the home for someone. It would come to him later, but for now, he had to continue his search. He then left the path and disappeared in the woods to search for the home of Dahlia. Shadrach watched the bandit as he walked off. He had wondered if that particular bandit was unaware of the Black Cloak Society. It had been foolish of him to try an attack, but it allowed Shadrach a perfect opportunity to locate the home of Dahlia. She was one of the members from his first years as leader of the group. It was his own mastery of the dark arts that allowed him to remain in charge so long. When the bandit was clear, he looked down at the cat and said, "You need to be a little more discreet, Manannan. If any of the royal family see you, this mission will be a failure." He watched as the cat stepped out of his robe and looked up at him. If one had just seen the cat, they would never suspect that it was actually another Black Cloak member, Manannan. Years earlier, the son of King Graham, Alexander, had transformed the wizard into a cat. The cat then said, "What exactly is this mission? King Graham is no doubt on alert for any of our group." He smiled. "The mission is this. We are going to infiltrate Graham's castle and then restore power to all the various forces that Graham and his family have stopped. That means you and your brother will have another shot at them." He watched as his former brother in the black cloaks said, "How do you plan to do that? Mordak is dead." Shadrach looked at Manannan and said, "I am well aware of that fact. Manannan, too many members of our group have fallen to people from Daventry. Lecrito almost had our revenge completed, but fell to that young Connor. This time, I'm controlling the whole plan. I have many spells ready to revive our lost members, and even to return you to your human form. However, we must do things in order. I've already set things in motion to restore Dahlia to power. That bandit will find her home and then contact me. The beauty is that he won't know what he's doing until he's outlived his usefulness." He then watched as the cat started to walk towards Daventry. "So what is the next step?" Shadrach smiled and took off his cloak and turned it around, revealing a bright white side to the cloak. "Very simple. I shall infiltrate the castle. It shouldn't be a hard task, posing as a historian." He watched as the cat stopped and looked at him. "A historian? The man who took over my home in Luador is the historian of Daventry. How do you plan to replace him?" Shadrach smiled again and held up his hand. He had been aware of the historian Derek Carlavigan and had prepared a spell to send the historian back to Ludor. His spell would cause him to fall ill to a malady that would drive the historian back to the house in Ludor. That was even perfect for the part of the plan that would happen in time. Soon his hand was glowing and a yellow light arced through the sky. As the light arced, its color faded. Then he looked at the cat and said, "Now, let's get moving. By the time we get there, Derek will be on his way back to Ludor." He then cast another spell, and his black hair shortened and became brown. His face became younger, and a pair of spectacle frames appeared on his face. As they emerged from the forest, he heard Manannan say, "I don't know why, but maybe that face is a bit too young. Of course, who am I to criticize? I'm a cat." He then watched as Manannan moved forward and said, "I'll find my own way into the castle when we get there. Graham will recognize me if he sees me." Soon he saw that his associate disappeared into the surroundings. Shadrach smiled again and headed in the direction of Castle Daventry. King Graham of Daventry could not believe the misfortune that had struck the castle. His trusted historian, Derek Carlavigan, had fallen ill. They even had to send him back to his homeland of Ludor. Of course, his good friend Crispin had helped by transporting him back. Ever since Crispin helped him in finding Mordock, Graham had insisted on Crispin helping Daventry. Crispin had also been helping Graham find out about the Black Cloak Society. Ever since he heard of his son's discovery in the Green Isles, he wanted to learn about this group of evil. He was almost lost thinking about what they had found when Crispin entered the throne room. He looked over at Crispin and said, "Any word on Derek?" He watched as the wizard shook his head and said, "No, I told Cedric not to come back until Derek was starting to feel better. Very unfortunate that he came down with that illness. I've seen it before, and it takes months to overcome. I fear you may need to find a temporary replacement for historian." Graham nodded in agreement. He then looked over to Crispin and said, "Have we found out any more about the Black Cloak Society?" He watched as Crispin nodded and said, "Indeed, I have found out many things, and I'm sure you aren't going to like what I have found." That worried Graham, and he looked at Crispin. He then heard the wizard say, "Apparently, they have been around for a long time, and it seems you and your family have always crossed their path. Even the witch Dahlia, whom terrorized Daventry, was a member. But I don't think that is the worst news." Graham got up from his throne and walked over to Crispin. "What would be worse than the age of the group and how my family has always seemed to cross their paths with them?" He watched as Crispin said, "The leader of the group is Shadrach, and he has been heading the group for years, longer than a natural lifetime. It appears he practices some very dark magic. It's the only way he could be in charge of this evil group for so long." Graham was about to ask about Shadrach, but he then heard one of his guards say, "A traveler is here to speak with the king." He quickly returned to his throne and watched as Crispin moved off to the side of the room to watch from near the magic mirror. He then saw a young man with spectacles enter, wearing a white cloak. When the man stopped and bowed, he said, "What brings you to the land of Daventry?" He watched as the man remained bowed, but heard him say, "I'm sorry to trouble you, sire, but I was traveling through your realm when a bandit attacked me and stole all my possessions. He took my books about the past of some of the realms and what little money I had. I do not know if you can help me in any way, but I thought I would report this to you directly." Graham felt sorry and disgusted that a bandit still worked inside the borders of Daventry. He also felt thankful. He was in need of a historian, and he didn't want the traveler to fall victim again. Graham then stood and said, "Rise. I will have my men go searching for the bandit that robbed you. Until they find the man, Daventry is in need of a historian, and I ask that you fill the job. Do you think you can help with that?" He watched as the man rose and looked at him and nodded. Graham then motioned to Crispin and said, "Very good. Crispin, who is my adviser, shall take you to a room. If there is anything you need, just ask." He then saw the man smile, and he could tell that his offer helped the young man. He then said, "By the way, what is your name?" When he was asked for his name, he knew he had to use a fake name. He had picked one out long ago. He looked at King Graham and said, "My name is Kale Silver. Thank you again for your help." He watched as Graham raised his hands and said, "We are helping each other. Now, I know you have had a trying time, so feel free to retire to quarters." He smiled. "Thank you. Would it be too much to ask for maps and such of the kingdom, so I can start after I rest?" He watched as the king nodded, and then saw Crispin start towards the door. He had recognized the wizard as he said, "Follow me, Kale. I'll show you to the room." As he followed, he remembered hearing that this particular wizard had started looking into the Black Cloak Society. As they walked, the wizard continued speaking. "There may be times when some odd names are mentioned. We are busy researching all the foes that King Graham and his family have encountered over the years. It seems that many of them are linked to a group called the Black Cloak Society." He knew he had to feign ignorance, and gave the wizard a puzzled look. "I've never heard of them. I take it they are very evil." When he saw Crispin nod, he said, "I hope they don't come here." He watched as Crispin stopped at a door and pushed it open, saying, "Don't worry. That is part of why we are trying to find out about them. If they try something again, we plan to catch them. One of their members had ruined the land of Daventry for decades." He then saw Crispin motion to the door, and also saw Manannan slip into the room. "Here is your room. I hope you find it comfortable. I'll get someone to deliver the maps and such to you later." He walked into the room and nodded. "Thank you. I think I will use this time to rest." He then closed the door and waved his hand, causing the room to glow for a second. He then turned to the cat and said, "I take it you saw who else was here?" He watched the feline nod. "Indeed. I will have to be careful, since he will surely tell Graham about me. I take it you want me to keep an eye on the bandit?" He nodded and said, "Yes, but take this note with you." He then put a small parchment on the floor. He watched as Manannan picked it up with his teeth. "When the bandit finds Dahlia's home, follow him in, and drop the note on the table. By the time he does what it says, I'll be ready to bring back Dahlia." He watched as the cat nodded, and then heard a knock on the door. He opened the door and saw a man with a bunch of books and scrolls. As the man brought the stuff in, he saw the cat silently leave. He was thankful that the man could barely see around the books, especially as the man said, "Crispin said to bring you all of Derek's notes and maps. I hope you can understand them." He then watched the man put them down and leave. When the door closed, Shadrach smiled and said, "I will. In fact, they will be very helpful." He then pulled out the map of Daventry and began to study it. As he studied it, he picked up on a magical essence that was in the map, and could tell that somewhere there was a magical essence that was Dahlia's home and spirit. That would be the key to the first part of his master plan to ruin the royal family of Daventry.